guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He was a chief of staff for Colin Powell. He's a colonel, Vietnam vet, professor. He's been through a lot, seen a lot. He's a very, very interesting man. He's just a wealth of knowledge, and just really had an awesome conversation with him. And this is one of those times where just like you book a guest and you're just like, wow, like this is amazing that I get to sit down and have a 1 hour conversation with somebody who is as knowledgeable and as interesting and just has as much wisdom as Colonel Wilkerson. So it just really was a fun conversation. And, you know, you can look him up online. He's had plenty of interviews and stuff like that. And he's just, anytime he speaks, he's just a really interesting person to hear talk. And his opinions and perspectives are just really worth paying attention to and listening to. So definitely a really fun show, and I'm glad I'm back in the studio. It's been a little bit, life's been kind of crazy, which I'm sure like most of my listeners, we all are stuck in this grind of having to go to work and do all this stuff, and it's hard to find time to do things we enjoy. And this is one of those times where I've been having a hard time to find time to do the podcast. But don't give up on the podcast, no matter how much time goes by. I'm not going to stop doing it. If you keep refreshing your cell phone app or going on our YouTube channel or whatever, and you keep trying to look to see if there's a new episode, even if a couple weeks goes by, just know that I will eventually do a show. And I just truly believe in what I'm doing. I truly believe in podcasts and anybody who's trying to provoke thought and then just spread information. You listeners who don't know, we have a little small family construction company, and we do, little jobs and little projects and stuff. But in the summer we pick up and we get very busy, and like we have been the last couple of weeks. And I also had a brother that got married and went on his bachelor party. So life's been a little crazy, and also having a newborn. So it's hard to find time, but I can see how the average listener, the average person is in the same type of grind, is in the same type of not hole, but just stuck in this rhythm of being machine-like and going to work and paying your bills and taking care of your chores, and don't have time to listen to podcasts or well, not really listen to podcasts, because I think that actually that's the one thing I can always find time to do. Maybe you won't have time to read a book or watch a documentary, but that's the thing about podcasts. One thing I loved about podcasts and why I got so into them was the fact that after high school and I started working full-time, I really felt like my brain wasn't stimulated anymore. And I felt like I just, my brain just turned off. And when podcasts really started getting popular and I started realizing like, wait, I do a lot of traveling. Why not listen to these things on the car instead of listening to music or the same old talk radio? And I can listen to something that's interesting and something that's a conversation starter. I would listen to a show, and next time I'm hanging out with my buddies, I'd be talking about a topic or something I heard on a show. So it just, it really was like a free education and a great way of just still getting information and getting great stories and hearing great perspectives. And really in a car or while you're traveling or when you're doing yard work or whatever, it's kind of, usually those times in your life are worthless or not worthless, but they really, you don't get anything out of it. It's just a pointless time, your travel time, your when you're doing chores. I mean, it can just be a pointless, just meaningless part of your day. But now you can use podcasts and you can use it to, like you have this free time to while you're traveling, while you're doing yard work, whatever, while you're painting your kid's room, whatever it may be. And you have this time where you can actually listen to something that's thought-provoking and catch up on some shows you like, or listen to a history podcast like Dan Carlin's, Daniele Vignelli's or Joe Rogan's or whoever's podcast you listen to. It's just a great time to make the time go by. I mean, you look at a half an hour, even if you have a half an hour chore, a half an hour you have to listen to a whole bunch of songs. The average song's 3 minutes, 4 minutes maybe, unless you're listening to like old Metallica stuff or Iron Maiden stuff where songs are like 6 to 8 minutes or whatever. But for the most part, they're short. Or you can listen to a conversation, and anybody who's had deep or meaningful conversations or interesting conversations, they know time flies. I mean, next thing you know, hour goes by. So it's just it's a great way to make the time pass. It's a great way to make the time go by, and that's why I truly believe in this media. I truly believe in podcasts, and it's just something that I love, and I can't thank podcasts enough for what they've done in my life, for just exposing me into so many interesting people and so many interesting conversations and just points of views, and it's been amazing. It's been a life changer. It's really molded and helped mold my perspectives and opinions and opened my mind to so many different things, and hopefully it's doing the same for many other people. And so that's why I truly believe in podcasts, and I have no idea why I went on that rant, but I just think that because of how busy I've been recently, and just kind of being a reminder of how some people at a young age, you could have a child, you could end up in a little bit of debt or whatever, and then you end up become this machine going to work or whatever, and really don't have any time to do anything that's more fulfilling or listening to something that's more interesting. So it's it's definitely a struggle, but I'm going to continue doing this, so don't give up on the show. I truly appreciate everybody who's been listening. The cool thing is, when I don't do a show for a while, it seems like a lot of people go into archives and listen to past shows, which is great, because I've done a lot of awesome past shows, from Ben McLeish's show to Rob Reynolds from Enter Shikari to Dr. Brzezinski, which was a really important show. If you haven't checked it out, please check that out. And also the one with Dr. Gregory A. Smith, Nancy Gabberty. We talked about health and wellness and natural remedies and homeopathic medicines and stuff like that. So I've just done so many awesome shows, and this is no different. I mean, to be able to do this is really, if I wasn't an atheist, I'd say it was a blessing. And it was a lot to do with just hard work and being OCD, and just really, when I start a project, I just really want to get into it, and I get obsessive about it. But it's hard. I mean, most people can't stay up till 1, 2 in the morning and then go to work the next day. Well, at least you can't do. No, I guess none of us can really do that for too long. And even with me, I struggled with it. It's hard, and but I just think it's important to continue doing this. And I'll keep this rant short, and I'll keep this intro short. But also remember to, if you want to support the podcast, to check out the Theory 6 Music Project, which is my music project, combination of metal and electronic music. And you can find it anywhere where you can download music. And check that out. It's a great way to support the show and help with some of the costs of the show. And what else? Also, our YouTube channel for any guest that calls in using video. This current show you're about to listen to, Lawrence Wilkerson, he called in just audio. But anybody who does call in using video, you can listen to the show and see the actual conversation on YouTube and see a side-by-side conversation with me and the guest. So you can also do that. And I think that's it for now. Follow me on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on all the podcast apps. Anywhere where you can find podcasts, you can find our show. Retweet the show, share the show, tell your friends about the show. And you know what? If you don't tell them about my show, tell them about somebody else's show. I just think that it's important to get these interesting conversations and do our best to kind of start our own ripple. And I think that's something I truly believe in. You guys have heard me say it over and over again, that how much I believe in the ripple effect and how much I believe in this idea of we can all make a difference, even if it is just sparking a conversation. And I think we can all do our part to do that. So even if it is as simple as retweeting something and somebody sees that, and then maybe that exposes them to somebody else's work or whatever, and then now they get obsessive about something. I mean, I can't remember exactly what got me into alternative media and just looking at history and historical events in a different light, but something did. And it could have been as simple as somebody just retweeting something. Or at that time, it would have been probably MySpace. Some of the younger crowd who doesn't know probably what MySpace is, but it was the original Facebook, I guess. If I don't know what else to call it, and it could have been as simple as seeing something on MySpace or running into some video on YouTube that somebody uploaded or whatever. And I truly believe that sometimes that's all it takes to get somebody in a rabbit hole of reanalyzing everything. And that's kind of what happened with me, and I'm sure that happened to a lot of people who's listening to this show, and I think it's important. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks again, guys, for all the support. Thanks again, everybody who keeps listening. I'm going to do my best to continue to release shows and get guests, and my schedule has definitely been busy, and it's been hard, but like I said, I truly believe in this show. I believe in this media, and that alone will be the motivating factor and why I continue doing this, no matter how bad of a investment it is and how much time it takes. And like most people, I don't have a very fulfilling day job, and I shouldn't even say very fulfilling. It's not fulfilling at all. So this is my way of doing my part and kind of trying to do my part and trying to leave this earth a little better than I received it, and even more importantly, doing that for my son. And I'm sure we all have that feeling. We all want to do things for our children, and we all want to raise them. We want them to be in a safe environment and give them a good place to live and survive in. But a lot of times we do that, not realizing that to do that, we kind of don't just have to focus on our kids and loved ones, but we have to focus on just everybody around us, and changing everybody's perspectives and opinions, and understanding that we're all pretty similar when it comes down to the basics of having a home and shelter and all that stuff. So I think we're all pretty similar, and that's probably why as I get older, I get less likely to be into nationalism or being proud of being Portuguese and all that stuff. I grew up in a Portuguese family. I'm proud of being Portuguese, but boy, as I get older, it really just seems pretty meaningless and pointless. I mean, every culture has great things about it, from Latin culture to being Lebanese, Chinese, Japanese, Salvadorian, whatever it may be, Estonian. They all have great things, great foods, great music, just great things about their culture. But I think that we should focus more on appreciating and enjoying those things, and having those things bring us together than using it to separate us. And we all have a lot more in common than we don't have in common. And if we focus on that, maybe it, this whole idea of nationalism and these imaginary lines on a map that we call borders will seem as ridiculous as they really are. And I think that's it. I think there's a point in all that. Hopefully you guys found it, because I think I might have missed it. But I think that's it, and I promise this is the last time I say I think that's it, and I'll let you actually enjoy the show. So I'll see you on the next one, guys, and hopefully I'll have another one out soon, within a week or two, if not sooner, counting on, who knows, by the time I finish recording this intro, I could have an email from a guest saying that they're available tomorrow, or, a day that I'm also available. So we'll figure something out, and we'll continue doing this shit. So enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
I'm glad to be with you. There are a few of us Republicans left, not many, who feel the way I do.
Yeah.
Not many.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I mean, that definitely seems like, one thing that I was really surprised about hearing conversations with you and interviews with you was, just the fact that you don't mind critiquing capitalism. You don't mind critiquing the Iraq war. And I think that one of these things about having these labels as a Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal or libertarian, whatever it might be, it seems like it boxes us into an ideology. And it's no different than being like a Patriots fan and a Giants fan. It's like once you picked a team, then I can never agree that Eli Manning is a good quarterback because I'm a Patriots fan, So it's like I love the fact that you're open-minded. I mean, I've heard you talk about capitalism, socialism, all these different ideas, and what do you think it is that brought you to this spot where you didn't be, I don't know how to word it, but you weren't stuck in this ideology, and you're willing to kind of look outside the box. I know you studied philosophy and art and all that stuff. Do you think that has a part to a part in it?
I think anyone's educational background has a part in the way they develop, particularly the way they developed after, say, middle age, after 50, 55 or so. They either become really, really hardcore, I know everything, don't talk to me, or they become the exact opposite of that. They become very accepting of the world being a very complex place, of humans being a very complex organism, and of things never being black and white. In fact, things are black and white only in church, if you will, or some other similar place. The world's really shades, multiple shades of all manner of colors. It's a prism. There are no truths so much as there are many truths. There are no falsehoods so much as there are many falsehoods. It's a very, very difficult thing to grasp this, I think, for some people, because they, one, simply don't have the educational background, and two, don't have the predisposition, as you just said. One of the founders, your analogy of the football teams is quite apt. Our founders despised what they call faction, Washington in particular, but the others, Adams, Madison, Jefferson, Gary, and so forth, despised factions too, political parties, because they saw political parties as being an institution that would over time absorb all the attention, all the focus, all the even the emotional content of people, just like you said football teams do. And so they would lose sight very quickly of the national interest, of the best interest of the country, of the best interest of the people, the majority of the people, and so forth. Jefferson was very eloquent about this business of factions. And of course, they thought that they could prevent them from coming about. And of course, they lost, and they lost almost immediately as the Jeffersonians went off into one camp and the Hamiltonians and others went into another camp. And Washington tried to hold both camps together through 8 years of really a very difficult period because of that.
Yeah, and that's so true. And it's funny because just looking at your background and knowing your father served in World War II, you're a Vietnam vet, and it seems like it's a common thing with people that are veterans. They seem to be the most anti-war, and it's funny because a lot of times you think very patriotic, nationalism, and then using those to motivate people to get involved. And what is it, do you think, that you see that maybe it's you end up seeing the interest in why you're actually going to war, or the fact that you see innocent people? Because I know there's, even at a young age, I know when you're in Vietnam, I'm not sure where I read this story, but something about a helicopter, and I know that you were involved in a helicopter that basically could have stopped or got in the way of attack on civilians. Is that an accurate story?
Yeah, it happened to me one time when I was out doing a scout mission in a very flat area with large tree lines, and my contact on the ground, who was the battalion commander who was moving the infantry through the area seeking to make contact with the enemy, told me I was in a free fire zone, and I was always skeptical of free fire zones. All that meant was you could shoot anything that moved in that zone, which was not a very discretionary way to go about contacting the enemy. I usually gave my crew strict orders that they were not to fire unless fired upon, or unless they saw someone getting ready to fire at them from the tree line or whatever, and they could engage before that person got a round off. In this case, the free fire zone was at one moment in time peopled literally by a single wagon with a woman in black pajamas driving the wagon. The wagon was kind of like a Conestoga. It had a cover on it. And I was authorized to explore that wagon by firing machine gun fire into it. And I simply refused to do so. And when the bird that was covering me, the AH-1G Colbert that was covering me, decided he would take care of it, I simply interposed my helicopter and told him over my dead body would he engage that wagon. And it turned out that the wagon had a little girl in it, and a little boy, and just a mama-san who was driving it. There was nothing lethal about it. And even if there had been anything lethal about it, let's say in the back of that wagon there were some arms covered up by a blanket or whatever, I was certainly not prepared to kill those 3 individuals to get at those arms.
Yeah, that story reminded me of the Chelsea Manning story, that when he released the video of killing civilians, and I can't remember if it was Iraq or Afghanistan, but it's funny how we these whistleblowers and these people who do these things that I think are heroic, like him putting his ass on the line to release his video to WikiLeaks, and also you to what you did, which I think is absolutely a heroic thing. You people should be looked at as heroes, and instead you have people like Snowden, and you have people like Chelsea Manning now being prosecuted under the Espionage Act and looked at as bad people. And it's funny how media has done such a great job kind of molding that narrative, because I talk to people who, my wife's grandmother, I remember talking about Edward Snowden with her, and she's like, oh, if he didn't do anything wrong, why doesn't he come to the U.S. and all this stuff? And she's just a common person, basically the only crowd that I think is still watching CNN and MSNBC and Fox News is that older crowd, because I think that their fans and people who watch those channels are kind of dying out, and the younger generation is going online and podcasts and stuff, which I think is a great thing, because as long as we don't let things like CISPA pass, that we still have this freedom to kind of put information out and try to get some type of truth and real just real news that's not dictated by who's paying for the commercials between segments. And it's amazing how media's done a great job of telling her that this person's a bad person. And I feel like Vietnam, I hear stories, because obviously I'm too young to actually be alive during that era, but I feel like media at that time, they did a great job of taking pictures of the bodies and really reporting on Vietnam. And that was one of the reasons why there was such an uproar about Vietnam. And I think one of the reasons why so many people were upset and understood quite quickly that it was a giant fuck up and it was a mess up, and it was people didn't really understand why we were there, why we're even getting involved in this conflict and stuff like that. And now obviously you have during the Bush era, they stopped people from showing videos of soldiers' caskets and stuff like that. And even though I think that I can understand if their intentions were pure and they really did want to respect the family members of those soldiers, I don't think they were. I think that more than likely it had to do with the fact that you wanted people, because for example, we're in a war right now, where we can be in the Afghan war, we can be in during the Iraq war. We don't connect the word with the violence and the horror and the things that are actually happening. So it's like, oh, we're in another war, we're bombing Syria, or we're bombing Yemen, or whatever it may be. But because we don't see the images, because we don't see interviews with the people who are there and are experiencing it, we have this disconnect from it. And
absolutely, there was a concentrated effort after Vietnam within the Pentagon. I know I participated in it, to learn the lessons of Vietnam, as it were, and to make sure that the press never captured the battlefield the way they did in Vietnam. That's part of the problem, because it's a very powerful element within the Pentagon, the liaisons with the press, and to make sure that the press, when it is on the battlefield, is captured by a particular unit. And I don't mean captured and put in irons. I mean captured by them emotionally, captured by them literally, because they can't go anywhere that the unit doesn't allow them to go, and films and writes about only what the unit wants them to see. It's sometimes hard to do that, and sometimes the press breaks away, but most of the time the message is very well controlled that way. That's the first part of it. The second part of it that makes it different from Vietnam, the second part of it is the press these days, both print and visual, is largely, especially that which is on the battlefield, largely owned by corporations. And those corporations, GE, for example, owns huge interest in the media, and GE sells a lot of weapons. GE is a merchant of death, just like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Grumman, and a host of others. And they control the media, and so the media message, in addition to being controlled by the Pentagon, is controlled by these corporate interests. so that you don't get a bad picture, a sad picture, a true picture of what warfare is all about. What you get is what they want you to get, because that enhances the bottom line for them. And then the third reason, I think, is that the press is full of people these days, both print and visual, who simply don't know anything about war, don't know anything about the Defense Department, don't know anything about military contractors and about the defense industrial base and so forth. It's true in a lot of areas. There are very few that know much about foreign policy and foreign affairs, international relations. But it's distinctly true about war. We don't have the Ernie Powells and the Hanson Baldwins and the Drew Pattersons and Petersons and so forth. We don't have the war correspondents like we had, for example, in those days. So we have people who flit in and out of the battlefield, write about this on Monday, this on Tuesday, and this on Wednesday. So those three things together, and probably other factors I haven't mentioned, have meant essentially that the Fourth Estate doesn't really do its job of speaking truth to power, particularly about warfare.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw it with, when initially we were trying to, or the Obama was trying to sell the idea of Syria and going into Syria, and showed us, these images of chemical weapons being used and all this stuff. And with very little information, they're trying to sell us this idea of getting involved in Syria. And I think that's a huge issue with Americans in general. And it's not our fault, because I think that some of it, obviously, I think there's people who don't care to do the research and don't care to learn, about what's going on in the world. But I also think that we're also, because the economy sucks, and because now you need two incomes just to be broke. You can't. It's not like when my parents grew up, or my grandparents or whatever. You could be a mechanic. You could be one income, and you could raise a family and live in middle class. And I think we're just so busy and so obsessed with just financially trying to get ahead that we don't have time or energy to do research and stuff. And I think that
and we also don't have skin in the game. I'm sorry, but if you don't have skin in the game, and to use your sports analogy again, if you don't have a bet on the team, or you don't have a favorite team, or you don't have a son on the field, you don't have some connection with the team, some emotional connection with the team, your commitment to it is a lot less. And there are not very many Americans who have skin in this game called interminable war. We've been at war for 14 years, and basically the lowest decile of Americans, the lowest 1/10 of Americans, and no more than 1% of 300 plus million Americans has been bleeding and dying for the other 99%. This is unconscionable in my view. This is not a democracy. This is something that corporate interests go out and call up young men and young women who are very poor, have no other opportunities, and send them off to die for the state. It's unconscionable, but we're doing it, and we've been doing it for 14 years.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I also think that some of it has to do with these. I mean, I feel like it's easier to get connected with a story when it's one person. It's like I'm gonna mess up this quote because I always mess up all my quotes on the show, but if one person dies, it's a tragedy. If 1,000 people die, it's a statistic. And it's one of these things where we hear these numbers on the news about people dying here and dying there, and it's just like we're so disconnected from it because we don't see the faces, we don't see, we don't connect with these people. And we also have done a great job of making kind of live. I almost feel like we're in a mild version of North Korea, the way that they sell us propaganda, the way they sell us, they kind of mold what they want us to think, or how they sell a story, from Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, like you said, GE connected to MSNBC, and Donahue, who had a show on MSNBC and was very critical of the Iraq war, ends up having the highest rated show and canceled, and so it just, it feels like we kind of live in this mild version of North Korea, where they just sell us these wars. I mean, like I was saying about the Syrian war, I thought it was accomplishment for the American people when they basically said, no, we're not going into another war. And then I did too. Yeah, and then a month later, they showed us these ISIS videos, and they showed us, and it's like they try to tug at our heartstrings. They try to get us emotionally involved, and it worked. I mean, it worked where people were upset. But it's like another quote that I'm going to mess up. But the next war starts when people who remember the last one are gone, and it's this idea that we have like awful long-term memory. And the reason why ISIS exists, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure you have done more research on this than I have, but has a lot to do with our destabilizing Iraq, and
absolutely. We wouldn't have things like Al-Qaeda in Iraq or ISIS or the Sunnis who are really behind ISIS, the disgruntled Sunnis from Iraq. We wouldn't have them at all if we hadn't invaded Iraq in the first place. These are all creatures of our creation. We made them. Just as surely as they are there today, killing people, cutting throats, robbing the oil, and so forth, we created them. Just like we helped to create the Mujahideen in Afghanistan when we were backing them against the Soviets. When the Soviets were in Afghanistan, we created them. This is what Chalmers Johnson called blowback, and it's a term that you now see increasingly in formal CIA intelligence reports, when even the agency begins to recognize that its actions, clandestine, covert actions in some theater somewhere, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, wherever it might be, have the potential for blowback. And often the blowback is worse than the gain achieved through the covert operation. So you must ask yourself, why are we doing these things?
Well, I mean, is it financial gain? I mean, you look at history, and it's funny because, just like that classic, another quote that I'll promise this is my last quote. But if you don't learn history, it's bound to repeat. And if you read history, I mean, you see that, what happened in Guatemala. You look what happened to the first democratically elected president of Iran. We took them down. United Fruit Company, like I said, in Guatemala and Chile, and all these other corporate interests that get involved with, and we use communism for a long time. And I almost feel like Islam and the word terrorism has become the new communism. It's the same way.
It has. It absolutely has. The same template we used in order to support dictators versus communism, where we would go in and prop up the dictator, give him money, give him assets, give him arms, give his military forces training in order for him to fight communism, and then he would turn around and 9 times out of 10 use the bulk of that help to suppress his own people. We're doing now in the name of counterterrorism. It's as if we picked the template up from the Cold War, erased communism, wrote in counterterrorism, and put it down on the same countries or similar countries all across the globe. We don't seem to learn anything.
Yeah, and the thing about terrorism, it's not like a country. It seems like it can just be this boogeyman that just will never go away, and we can continue justifying invading different countries and spend more money on defense and military. And I mean, our budget is absolutely insane. I mean, the money, I always tell people, like, don't ever vote for a tax increase locally or federally or anything. And it's just like, our income inequality is horrendous. We spend way more money on defense and military, when first of all you probably have a better chance of dying of peanuts than terrorism. I know September 11th, because we have that emotional attachment to it, and everybody was affected by it. I think they absolutely capitalized on that to go into Iraq, because I mean, I forget what the statistic was, but like 80% of the public after September 11th was convinced that Iraq had something and Saddam had something to do with September 11th. And I think that it's one of those things where, what was the Project for a New American Century, which they talked about having a new Pearl Harbor. And I think it's one of those things where you can kind of, and I don't know, September 11th, I'm a big fan of talking about it, because I think it's an important part of history and its current history. But I think we don't talk about it the same way we talk about Pearl Harbor or some of the other, or even like Gulf of Tonkin, talking about Vietnam and you being a vet. I mean, that didn't happen how they said it happened, and they use that to kind of get to tug at people's emotions and get them backing the going into the war. And I wonder if they did the same thing with September 11th. Well, I think it's quite obvious that that's probably what they did. And it
certainly did with respect to Iraq, because Saddam Hussein had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11.
Yeah, and he had nothing to do with 9/11. And that's the thing, like, people have to look at it, well, what if the tables were turned, okay? What if a country invaded our country for reasons, unjustified reasons, and we're knocking at our doors and looking through our stuff, and you have private companies like Blackwater, and we spent tons of money on KBR, Halliburton, and all these private companies that were just making tons of money off this war. And you look at history, it just seems like it's a repeating thing. And I've heard you during an interview mention Smedley Butler, which I think everybody should read his work. War is a Racket, because this is a guy who talked about it himself, and this was a long time ago. So it just makes you think that it's the same story. History seems like it's the same story, just with different characters. It's like you had the Roman Empire, you had just like same idea of those in power trying to stay in power, trying to control the masses, and it just maybe technology's changed, maybe the way we get around from horses, now we have cars, but it seems like it's the same motivations and same story.
There is a lot of the same thing going on. I mean, Butler's comment about Al Capone being a petty criminal because all he operated in was Chicago and surrounding areas, and Smedley, a Marine general, operated on 2 continents, was fairly apt. I mean, Butler, I think, if I recall, had been involved in something like 35 different U.S. excursions, to include China, something like 29 in Latin America, where we were simply protecting our commercial interests. I would have less problem with that kind of blatant exposure of force, though, than I do this kind we do today. If a president were to come out and say, I'm going to Iraq because there's 300 billion barrels of oil underneath the desert, maybe 400. Saudi Arabia is running out of oil soon, and I need a new replacement for that oil. And if you guys out there on Route 66 and Highway 95 and so forth want to keep driving your SUVs and your pickup trucks and everything, we got to have that oil. I would appreciate that from a president far more than I depreciate or actually abominate presidents saying we're going to liberate the people. We're going to bring freedom and democracy to Iraq. We're going to kill 300,000 Iraqis and bring them peace and bring them freedom and bring them Jeffersonian democracy. That's the height of hypocrisy. That's the height of stupidity, too, in my view. If you told the American people the truth and they said, well, go do it anyway, so be it. I mean, that's what this country's based on, is majority rule. If 51% of the American people and or their representatives in the Congress say, go get that oil, I can support that. But saying I'm going to get that oil under the guise of I'm bringing freedom and democracy to the Iraqi people, I really want to do that. I want to establish a Jeffersonian democracy in Baghdad. That doesn't cut it.
Well, the thing that's interesting to me is I think, like everybody who's really intrigued with foreign policy, with history, and all these things, we always kind of get to the same question of who's pulling the strings. And you get people like Wesley Clark, who talked about I believe it was an older interview. I don't know if he was on Democracy Now! Or where was he, but he talked about seeing papers or somebody talking to him about wanting to invade Syria, and they had a list of countries they wanted to invade.
Absolutely. When I was in the Pentagon in 2001 and then again in 2002, I saw contingency plans for taking operations into Syria, into Iran, and even into other regions of the Middle East. And I asked the question, was this just normal contingency planning? After all, I'd been a war planner for some 15 years or so in my own career. I've done a lot of contingency planning. It's what the military does in case someone suddenly becomes an enemy. You have a contingency plan for dealing with that. But these didn't strike me as the usual kind of concept or old plans that I dealt with. They looked like they were pretty specific, and they looked like they'd been taken off the shelf and dusted off and were getting ready to be implemented. And I asked questions about it at the time. I even saw one with respect to North Korea. I had an Air Force 3-star general tell me that he thought the Air Force could guarantee 80% or higher destruction of North Korean targets, deep underground targets, if we were to go to war there. I thought I'd left a building where everybody was smoking some really high-grade stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, like Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, it seems like it's just, the world is just a chessboard for these world powers, to just stay in control. It's like a video game or a computer game you play where you create this empire and you're trying to control the world, and it just seems like that's what's going on. And when you look at, there's a great documentary called The Trials of Henry Kissinger, and it's also based on the book of the same title. And to see the foreign policy, all his decisions and what the real reasons on why he made these decisions at the time, and just seeing that it all seemed like it was just geopolitical strategy. It had nothing to do with, caring about this country or thinking that this country is going to be a threat. And I mean, you look at the most obvious thing. we go around knocking down dictators because we, and saying that they're human rights issues and all this stuff. But yet, one of our biggest allies is the Saudis, who treat women like second-class citizens. I mean, they have no rights. They're basically,
and probably did have something to do with 9/11.
Yeah, well, yeah, all those. Well, they were all Saudis. The people who supposedly were involved, they were all Saudis. So, I mean, the fact that it's amazing, the relationship with the Saudis, and the fact that we know that they fund terrorism, and but it's so weird because now we also are ally with Israel, who obviously are mortal enemies of the Saudis, and so it's just like it's
very close though right now. Riyadh and Tel Aviv are very close right now. Bibi Netanyahu and the new king are the latest buds in the Middle East because, of course, both are opposed to Iran.
Yeah. Well, what's that saying? My friend's enemy is my
yes.
Yeah.
My enemy's enemy is my friend.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that's what it seems like, and so it's amazing how all this stuff happens. And this is, I mean, it's funny because sometimes I get friends of mine and we talk about these issues or certain things, and they kind of throw out the word, that sounds like a conspiracy, or that sounds, and I'm just like, history's full of conspiracy. Conspiracy is actually a charge that you can be charged with. It's like conspiracy happens. I mean, regardless. I mean, if you believe Oswald shot JFK, or you believe that there was more to the story, which obviously I tend to believe, then either way, it was a conspiracy. Somebody conspired to kill the president of the United States of America. And so, I mean, I just think that we can't. I mean, it almost gets to a point where, as you get older, and this is the thing about getting older, and that's why I love talking to people who have been through as much as you've been through and has seen as much as you've seen, because I think as you get older, you do start putting things in perspective, and you start realizing that things that you believed might not be what they seem. And I talked to some friends and about getting older and having adult responsibilities and being a father and having to go to work. And I work a full-time job. This is a hobby that I just love doing, and it's my way of kind of doing my part into trying to spark these conversations. And that's why I call it the ripple effect, because I truly believe that even if it's just sparking a conversation, we can kind of just enlighten people and awaken people to these issues and get people talking. And I think that alone is at least doing something, which is better than doing nothing and not sparking these conversations. And so I think I lost my train.
I think you're right. I think the only place where I can find what I would call news that actually does attempt at least to speak truth to power, other than McClatchy, the McClatchy newspapers do a pretty good job of it still, even with all the pressures out there. But the only place I can find it consistently is on the internet. And I'm very concerned about some of these government moves, the FCC moves and so forth, towards the internet and towards policing the internet. This move to make the cable companies have high-speed routes, for example, while everybody else has moderate-speed routes, to me is just another attempt by big companies like Comcast, Verizon, and others to control the internet, which ultimately will wind up making the internet, just like we were talking about the cable media and others are, corporate owned and corporate directed. So we'll lose the one really good source we have for news.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's one fight that I think everybody has to stay on top of, and that's keeping the web just this place where we can kind of do what we want and share, have the freedom, have real freedom of speech, because let's be honest, we really don't have freedom of speech anymore, and your constitutional rights kind of go out the window, and with the NDAA and the Patriot Act and all these other things, I mean, it's insanity. I mean, you kind of feel like if you piss off the right person, they can basically find any reason to detain you, you can just disappear from the face of the earth with never being charged with anything. I mean, look what the TSA does, and basically molest people who don't want to go through the x-ray machine or whatnot. And it just kind of seems like little by little we're becoming this police state, and we're becoming this thing where we keep sacrificing freedoms for security, and we never get safer. And just like that, another quote, I promise will be my last quote, but just the fact that you'll probably lose both and gain neither. So it just I think it's one of those things we have to realize that like we talked about terrorism, very few people actually die of terrorist attacks. And if we keep giving up our freedoms, and I mean, it seems like because of the internet, the other thing about the internet is it is connecting us more. I mean, I do have the capabilities to talk to you, to talk to people from Japan, from Europe, from South America instantly on Skype or wherever, and that's great. But I think we're one of the things we're giving up for it is our information. It's the fact that every single thing we do online is being analyzed. Megadata, the NSA is storing everything, and so if you piss off the right person, they can go look at your records, and if you and find something to use against you, and I think that's scary, but I wonder if that's just evolution. Is that something that's just bound to happen as we get more comfortable? Because I mean, I grew up in a generation where computers were just becoming more common when I was growing up, and I didn't grow up with one, but I had friends that had one and stuff like that. But the younger generation, they grew up in a world where literally it's completely normal to have your whole life online. And so do you think that's just the evolution of it, and it's just going to get to the point where people are just going to learn to live without privacy, and that's just going to be something that becomes the norm?
I think you put your finger on a real problem and a real challenge. I think some of this, what you just described, is controlled, is directed. I think some of technology and its purpose and the way it's designed, the way the agency, for example, has participated in putting backdoors in people's computers all over the world, in putting programs in people's systems and systems of systems all over the world, in order to have access, in order to spy, in other words. I think a lot of this is controlled so that in the future, when the population reaches, as it is going to around 2050, 9 billion, and we discover suddenly that there are only resources on this finite earth for about 6 billion, and the 3 billion who are going to have to be cut loose, as it were. Look at the Mediterranean today and boats that are sinking with 600-700 people on them. Look at the flows out of North Africa and the Maghreb towards the southern belly of Europe. That's just the beginning. When all of this starts to really come to fruition so that no one is ignorant of it anymore, everyone begins to understand that we're running out of water, that we're running out of arable land, that we don't have enough food to feed people, that there aren't nearly enough jobs for the people under 35 and so forth. Once that begins to get around the globe in a significant way, and it will through this technology, you've got to have mechanisms of suppression. You've got to have mechanisms of control. You have to have Big Brother in place, to quote Orwell. I think a lot of this is by design. I think, for example, the reason we were pushing heavy equipment down to the law enforcement agencies across America was not because the DOD wanted to get rid of excess equipment. It was not because it wanted to be kind to police forces across the country. It was because they are looking at the possibility of having to suppress the American people. And in that possibility, they're going to need the law enforcement entities across this country. They're going to need them to be well protected. They're going to need them to be well armed. And then they're going to need them to be the leading edge of this suppression. Now, when they did away with posse comitatus in the NDAA about 5 years ago, that is to say, they did away with the prohibition against the armed forces participating in domestic law enforcement. They aided and abetted that process, of course. So declaring martial law is just a drop of the coin now. The president says do it, and the military does it. But they need an ally in this. They need a face for this, and it's going to be the civilian law enforcement entities, which they're supplying with this heavy gear. So what we're doing, in essence, is creating a carabinieri, a guardia civil, inside the United States. And this is not because we fear terrorists. This is because we fear our own people.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more dangerous than than ideas and somebody sparking ideas and thoughts and actually revolting. I mean, I think that we live in a world where revolutions was a thing of the past. We feel like it can't happen in our time, but I feel like it's a matter of time before people revolt. I mean, income inequality just keeps getting worse. People are broker and broker, and you keep seeing the richest people in the world becoming richer and richer and richer. And as the middle class disappears, the middle class, I mean, I know it's kind of a cliche term, but we're kind of the backbone of the economy. We're the backbone of the country, because most people in the middle class don't have, like myself, don't make enough money to really save any or to invest in stocks or anything like that. So what do? Most of us spend our money. So we reinvest in the economy of cars by buying cars and by buying TVs, by buying, clothes or whatever. And but as we keep having less money to spend and the money just keeps filtering up, then eventually, I mean, the economy is going to disappear. And obviously we don't export much of anything, and we and we're in a huge debt. I mean, you look at the debt clock in New York. They had to add more digits to it, more screens that so they could add more digits to it, and just the debt just keeps growing and growing, and it's just going to get to a point where I feel like either a real collapse is bound to happen, or there's going to end up being a revolt, because people are just going to be upset and really have no choice, because I mean that's when it happens, is when people feel like they've had enough. And I mean I think now with the internet, as long as it can stay free and people can go online and do research and stuff like that, and I feel like the younger crowd is definitely not interested in the mainstream media and the MSNBCs and stuff. I think most of their ratings come from airports and bars and gyms having it on in the background. And
my students get most of their news from Jon Stewart and before Stephen Colbert, Bill Maher. That's where they get their news, from political satire.
Hey, it's better. It's actually better than the mainstream media, to be honest. I mean, if that's, I mean, I honestly, growing up, I was a big fan of Jon Stewart, and I still am. I still find the show funny. Obviously, I don't agree with all his views, but I like the fact that he he's willing to kind of pick on both sides. And honestly, if somebody who doesn't care at all about current events or what's going on in the world, if the only show they watch is Jon Stewart, then maybe it'll spark their interest in kind of figuring out what's going on. I mean, obviously he's gotten some shit for the head of Blackwater being on the show, and he didn't really give him a hard time. But I mean, I know Al Gore, when he was on, he gave him a hard time about selling his current TV to Al Jazeera and all this stuff, because so it just he definitely stays on one side, but I definitely feel like at times he will jump to criticize the liberals and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that the mainstream media it's a joke. I mean, you have one side that, I mean, CNN just sucks in general, but like MSNBC will pick one side, and then Fox News will pick the other side, and it's just people reinforcing their ideologies already. So it's like, if I'm a conservative, then I'm just watching Fox News, and they just reinforce my ideas I already have. And to me, it's like I have the most interesting and thought-provoking conversations with people who I don't agree with on every single issue. And I think that's what people should do. People should research and listen to people who they don't agree with. I've had Roger Stone on the show, who's a political consultant a political consultant, and he worked with Nixon and Reagan. I had Jack Abramoff on, who's a lobbyist, and I don't agree with all their politics, but I mean I have them on because I think it'll make for interesting conversation, and if that's where you actually learn stuff. It's with these conversations and talking to people you don't necessarily agree with, but after it's all said and done, you might actually agree with them, or you might at least see where their point of views come from. And I think that's the power of conversation. That's the power of having podcasts and alternative media where you can get different perspectives, and that's not funded by big corporations. And I think that's important. I think we were told at a young age to not talk about politics, don't ever talk about religion or politics. That's what we're told, like, that only cause arguments. But it's like, but we can argue about sports all we want. That's okay. We can be at each other's throat about what happened with Deflategate, and stuff like that, but yet we can't talk about politics, which actually affects our lives and affects how much money's being taken out of our paychecks and where our money's going, and if our young ones of this country are being sent to an unjustified war to die. And it's just, my wife watches Dancing with the Stars, and they have I can't remember if he lost his limbs in Afghan or Iraq, but he lost his arm and his leg, and he's on the show, and it's a silly show, but every time I walk by the TV and she's watching it, it just makes me so upset to know that this person, it has to live the rest of his life without these limbs for a war that was unjustified. And people are watching this show, and very patriotic when they see that, and they're proud of being American, because this guy is a very heroic person to be able to to deal with these issues and still smile and do this. But I think it should also piss people off knowing that there are people like him who are hurt, who will never be the same. I mean, I know Vietnam veterans who they'll tell you that after Vietnam they were never the same. They saw things that affected, they'll stay with them forever and affected the way they looked at everything and their psyche. And to know that people have to deal with these demons and post-war trauma and all this stuff, and then when you look back at it, it's just like, oops, Iraq was a mess up. Oh, we'll just get over it. Oh yeah, we just all agreed that it was a fuck up. Well, yeah, we can move on from it. But what about these veterans who have to live with not having a leg or arm? These veterans who have to live with psychologically never being the same. I mean, to me, it's like we can't just keep looking at fuck ups and say, oops, we messed up, and then just move on from it. Like, I think we have to keep remembering these things. And when we do see a veteran like that, we have to, it should make you upset, and it should infuriate you, the fact that somebody has to live with the losing their limbs, and the fact that we treat our veterans like shit anyways. I mean, I forget what the statistic is for, 1 out of I don't know, every 6 homeless people are a veteran, or 5, whatever it is. I mean, that should just make people super upset, to the point where they're screaming at, like, where the fuck is our taxpayer money going to that we don't even take care of veterans? It's like we're all patriotic when we're sending them there, but then when they come back and they need our help, then all of a sudden it's like, then we're not so patriotic. I mean, it's insanity. So sorry about the little rant, but it just
I was just out in Oklahoma, and I was having dinner with a number of people from the leadership in that state, and on my right was sitting the Secretary of State for the state of Oklahoma for Veterans Affairs. She was a retired Army 2-star general. And she looked at me and she said, "Do you know who's filling my prisons up in Oklahoma?" And I knew what she was going to say. And I said, veterans? And she said, absolutely. They're the growing and highest content in my prisons. And I frankly don't know what to do about it. And Oklahoma, and a lot of Americans don't know this, but Oklahoma and Maine are the two, on a per capita population basis, are the two greatest providers for the land forces of the United States. More people enlist in the Army and the Marine Corps from Maine and Oklahoma than any other states based on population. Now, you might have more from California, but California's got a much bigger population. So she was stunned that this state that produces lots of Marines and lots of soldiers was bringing them back and putting them in jail. And we had a long conversation about it at dinner that night. And it's a complex issue. There are a number of things that contribute to it. One is that we're recruiting, as I said, from the lowest decile of the population. We're actually taking people with criminal records, with drug records, with psychiatric problems and so forth, because we can't find enough people who don't have those kinds of problems. So that's part of it. Part of it is the fact that they come back with post-traumatic stress or with some other traumatic brain injury or some other affliction, and they're just cut loose by the VA in order to get them off their books and off their cost sheets. And so they go out and they have absolutely no support, and they wind up in jail. Part of it is we're giving them psychotropic drug cocktails that are just awesome to get them off the books, to get them off the sheets where they're costing the Veterans Administration money, the taxpayer money. So we give them these drug cocktails, and then we're surprised that 22 of them kill themselves every day. The suicides sometimes are directly attributable to these drug cocktails, these psychotropic drugs that we give them. I once had a person at Walter Reed National Medical Center, 10 years a nurse practitioner, 10 years of this very brutal 14 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and she said she would never give more than 3 drugs to any individual simultaneously, because there's no way you know how they're going to interact in that particular person's physiognomy, how their biology is going to react. And to give them 5 is to take a risk with killing them. And that's what we're doing. So yes, it's unconscionable how we're treating our veterans, but there's a lot of guilt out there. You see people go to the Dallas football stadium, for example, and just cheer wildly for American Sniper. Or you see them go to the Atlanta airport and clap and clap and clap when GIs get off with their uniforms on and so forth. They're trying to assuage their guilt is what they're trying to do. Now, there are a few of them out there who are genuinely supportive of the veterans, genuinely glad that they're there and so forth, glad they survived, glad they made it home. But not very many. Most of them are there to assuage their guilt because they feel sick inside that they're putting these young men and women into harm's way, to kill people for state purposes, to die themselves for state purposes, to come home horribly wounded, and they constitute less than 1% of this country. Less than 1% of this country. As I said before, this is an unsustainable situation. Something's going to break.
Now, being in the military and coming from a military family, your father serving in World War II, what's your opinion to people who want to join? I mean, do you think it's? I mean, now looking back and reflecting, I mean, do you still think that it's a good thing to pursue, or do you think that you obviously become a puppet to whatever politicians decide they want to do? I mean, what's your opinions to young people who might be listening to this who are thinking of joining the military?
I try to be very careful about what I tell them, just as I try to be very careful about what I tell them about going to Deloitte Touche or to Goldman Sachs or into the Peace Corps. A lot of my students go to those places. I just had one of my brightest students go to Goldman Sachs. I tell them be very careful. First, be very careful that it's the right thing for you to do. And second, be very careful in leaving yourself an escape route. Be very careful in how you accommodate yourself to whoever becomes your initial boss, your initial leadership chain, especially in the armed forces. Don't ever do anything illegal, and don't ever do anything you think is unethical. If you get an illegal order or an unethical order, go above that person giving you that order's head to his boss or her boss. And if that doesn't work, go above that person's head and so forth. Don't be afraid to make a rebel out of yourself, a maverick. Don't violate your ethics and don't violate the law. Generally speaking, I'll say that for almost any profession or any place where people are going. But I generally, when a student comes in and says, I'm going to work for the CIA, or I'm going to work for the National Security Agency, the NSA, or I'm going to work for the DIA, or I'm going to join the services or whatever, they say it kind of reluctantly to me. If you knew the nature of my seminars, you'd understand why. And they say, you have any problem with that, professor? And I say, absolutely not, because we need good people there. If there aren't good people there, then we're lost. If there aren't good people going into the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, into the armed forces, then we're lost. Because one, they'll continue to do things that are wrong, illegal, and unethical. And two, there'll be absolutely no check on it, none whatsoever. So don't be afraid to go to work for these places, but don't let it ruin you. Don't by any means let it ruin you. Yeah. Leave it before it ruins you. Rather than let it ruin you, leave it. So always leave yourself an escape route. Always leave yourself. Don't ever be in a position where you're not prepared to, so to speak, resign. Because if you're not prepared to resign, you're not prepared to be fired. And I think that's crucial. One of my greatest regrets is not submitting my resignation letter. I wrote it out. I looked at it a number of times, but I never submitted it. I walked out in January of 2005, but I could have walked out a lot easier and a lot sooner, and I would have felt a lot better because I knew what the Bush administration had turned out to be by that time, and I knew that it was unethical and even an illegal administration in many respects. I knew the president had performed illegal acts. I knew he had ordered illegal acts, and I'm not one who believes that if the president does it, it's legal, as Dick Nixon tried to maintain. The president's just like any other citizen. If he breaks the law, he should be punished for it. So, I always try to tell them, and I use myself as an example sometimes, don't go beyond that point where you should have left. Always know where you are. Always know that there's a route for you to exit, and exit if you think it's necessary.
But don't you think, I mean, I completely agree. I had James Colbert on, a friend of mine who's been on multiple times, and I remember once talking about how, and he does an alternative news website called CorbettReport.com. It's a great website, I'm sure most of my listeners are familiar with it, but we talked about how when he first started doing alternative media, was he afraid of people watching him, or was he afraid of people spying on him, or whatever? And he's like, that's not a reason not to do it. That's a reason to do it. It's because you don't want to live in a world where you're being spied on and you're treated like a criminal with doing nothing wrong, and you're treated like a criminal just for questioning your government and questioning their intentions. And that's the motivation. And I think that, what he said, it kind of popped up in my mind when you were talking about, yeah, good people should be doing these things. Good people should get involved in the agency. Good people should be involved in NSA, because if they don't, then who's going to be there? Who is going to be doing this work? And it's going to be corrupt people and people who end up becoming brainwashed. And I actually, at a family get-together not too long ago, found out that my cousin, I knew a first cousin of mine, I know that she was in the FBI, and her husband also was in the FBI and retired from the FBI. They're both in the Bureau. And then I just found out that he also was in NSA before that. And I got in a conversation about the NSA, and quickly he jumped to, we talked about Edward Snowden, and he quickly jumped to the idea that, they're not all, they're not just spying on everybody like everybody thinks they are, and this and that. And it makes you wonder, I mean, is it brainwashing, or do people really just believe the rhetoric that they're being told when they join these agencies? Is it? I mean, it's similar thing with politicians. Do these people go into these things with good intentions and then eventually become brainwashed, or they become a part of a system that they just realize that you're either have to go along with, or or you're going to be shit out of luck. You're going to lose your job, or you're going to get in trouble. And do you think? Yeah,
those are all good questions. I think most people go into the agencies and the departments with a desire to serve and a desire to do the best they can. I think they sometimes are victims of groupthink, victims of the departmental jargon, if you will, the departmental spin, the departmental lie in some cases. But generally, over time, they'll break away from that. They'll figure it out, and they'll break away from it. They'll move into another section of the agency or department, or maybe they'll leave. There were lots of people, for example, many people have come to me subsequent to January 2005 when I left the State Department, from the Central Intelligence Agency, from the Armed Forces, and said, this is what I thought about it, this is what I did, this is how I counteracted it, this is how I reacted to my boss telling me to do this or to do that. And most of these people are talking about torture or enhanced interrogation techniques or secret prisons or renditions or whatever. So there were a lot of good people who were objecting. There's still a lot of good people out there in the agency right now who are angry as heck that the agency under John Brennan has been able to suppress, for the most part, any accountability for what the CIA did during those years of torture and secret prisons and rendition and so forth. There are reasons the president, I think, and the administration in general is behind Brennan for this, because they don't want to have to pay massive, massive reparations to some of these people, many of whom they treated in this way and were not, like the German, for example, were completely innocent, just mistakenly picked up. So they don't want to have this record opened up like the Canadians have, where they have to constantly look at these cases and pay people money for the damage they did to their lives. That's understandable, but only so far. I mean, I think we should have some kind of accountability. But there are a lot of people who are really angry that the people who did this and to whom they vouchsafed their objections and who they walked away from, turned their backs on and walked away from, and in some cases even went to those people's bosses and tattled on them, as it were. They're angry that nothing's been done, that there's been no accountability for these people who in their minds violated the spirit and the letter of the law within the agency, whether it be the CIA or the NSA. They're not happy about it at all. There are some people out there who actually think Edward Snowden's a hero, not a whistleblower.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a little bit of both. I mean, personally,
he's certainly brave. He's certainly got more courage than I could gin up in my whole life, I think. I can't imagine the courage it took to do what he did. And I've listened to him. I've listened to almost all of his interviews. I've listened to some of them at length several times because I wanted to catch the nuance. I wanted to catch the inflection in his voice. I wanted to look into his eyes as much as it's possible to do over camera. I listened to them. I watched them. I listened to his words, his sentence construction. I listened to the way he explained himself. And this man thought that he was doing a service for the American people. He's certainly not guilty of espionage. I can find no place, nor can I find anyone whose views I trust within the establishment, that they will say that he actually damaged something to the extent that blood was shed, that someone lost his life or whatever. I can only find embarrassment. I can find exposure of hypocrisy. I can find exposure of massive usurpation of civil liberties. I can find exposure of breaking of the law, even some corruption and malfeasance in office and so forth, but I can't find any substantial damage to national security. So that rules out the Espionage Act, and it should never have been used. At most, he's guilty of revealing classified information, and that in and of itself probably would carry enough penalty where I would not come back, not in this environment anyway. And so he's isolated himself from his country and from his friends for perpetuity, probably. That took a hell of a lot of courage. And the man is genuine in why he did it, I think. I mean, I just can't see any other reason for him having done what he did, taken the risk that he took, put his family in jeopardy the way he did, put himself in jeopardy, put his girlfriend in jeopardy and so forth, put Greenwald in jeopardy, put Laura Poitras in jeopardy, all those other people. I can't see any other reason than that he thought the American people deserved to know how their laws and their money was being abused in their name. And I can't punish him for that.
Yeah, and he worked for Booz Allen, and do you think that's one of the reasons? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's probably the obvious reason why they.
The guy was a genius. He is a genius when it comes to internet technology, information technology, all that stuff that just baffles my mind when I get much deeper than my iPad or my smartphone. He knew it. He had them buffaloed. He knew more than they knew. He knew more than Keith Alexander, Jim Hayden. He knew more than any of those people wearing stars and so forth. And that's, we were talking about this a while ago. That's what's going to protect, ultimately, everyone against Big Brother. It may be a difficult struggle. It may be a hard struggle. But there are so many young people out there who you tell them they can't do something. You tell them you're going to violate their privacy. You tell them you're going to take away their rights. You tell them they can't use that internet anymore in a free way. They're going to eat your lunch. They're going to take you down. They're going to do what the Chinese are doing to us right now, and what we're trying to do back to the Chinese, only in spades. These people are going to use these instruments to bring us down if we don't, learn to accommodate, learn to give them the freedoms they should have, the rights they should have, and so forth. You think all this science fiction stuff is just that, science fiction. It isn't. Watch one or two people who are really good, like Edward Snowden, really know their business, really know the systems. Watch them take the big boys down. Watch them take the corporate interests down. Watch them ruin Wall Street. I mean, it could be done. And it may be in the future sometime in order to rectify some of this wealth imbalance and so forth and so on. But I have faith in these young people. I teach them every day. I have faith that they're smarter than we are.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, you talk to people who are younger, and it's just amazing at, like, in their teens or even early 20s, how much they know. And, I mean, it is one of those things where I wonder if they know what to do with that information because they have access to all that information. I think it only makes it more of even more amazing, the fact that a long time ago, a lot of quotes that I quoted and many people love and books many people love still are relevant today. And this is when people only lived till their 20s or 30s, and had half the life expectancy we have today, and still had the wisdom and that they did. And even our founding fathers and all these people, how young they were when they were having these conversations and debates and coming up with these ideas. And I kind of tend to believe the same thing. I'm kind of a cup half full. I don't know if a revolution means there's going to be violence before we get to a better world. And but to me, it's like we have to start somewhere, and if that means sparking these conversations, doing our part in staying upset and realizing that, you know, we can't keep you know, treating whistleblowers like they're criminals, and which I think is a great tactic to scare the shit out of anybody else who wants to come out and speak their mind. I mean, this idea of just Snowden will just come back to America and we'll treat him just fine and we'll give him a.
That's the reason they don't do it. That's the principal reason they don't do it. They're afraid they'll motivate lots of others. I got news for them. There are lots of others already out there. And I mean, they're my conversations with a number of people, both in the media and in the agencies and departments, is this is not all just Snowden. There are other people out there who are feeding the beast, so to speak, and there are other people who are in the wings ready to keep feeding the beast if the beast doesn't calm down a little bit. You saw what happened in Baltimore. That's another example of how this country is off kilter right now, majorly off kilter. And when people come on the mainstream media and say, well, how come no one said anything about this? I want to just smack them. I want to smack them right upside the head. Where have you been for the last 400 years, asshole? I mean,
yeah.
You know, it isn't exactly like we treat black people in this country as if they were equal partners in this country, and we haven't for 400 freaking years. This is another aspect of it that gets me going, because I know how many people in my own party, political party, are really part and parcel of this. How many of them are closet racists, if not outright racist? How many of them would just as soon all the Hispanics and Islamists and others of other colors and other religions would just get up and leave this country and leave it to us wonderful white Anglo-Saxon Protestants? There's still a big, huge component in my political party of people like that. So, yeah, we got a lot of problems. We got a lot of things to fix and a lot of imperfections. But as I said, these young people coming up give me a lot of hope, give me a lot of faith in their ability to handle this future. A lot better, I tell them sometimes, than I've handled my present.
Yeah, and I, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, I look at every young person coming up, and it's just the same way a certain book or documentary inspired me. It's like, you know, we hope that these conversations and you know, what you're teaching and your lectures can inspire them to make a difference. And you know, and every great change in the world has started off with just, you know, a idea, a conversation, and then
most powerful thing on the face of the earth, an idea.
Yeah.
Or I'll give you a quote if I can remember it. There's nothing more powerful on earth than an idea whose time has come.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's you know, it's a reason. There's a reason why we, you know, when they wanted Martin Luther King to shut up, and they wanted to shut up Malcolm X, and they wanted, you know, it's like you don't want people who can spark ideas and get people's brains thinking. You want there's a reason why they didn't want slaves to read, and they didn't want them to learn. They wanted just big and strong and people who didn't think and didn't have ideas. And so I mean, I think that it's a good thing what we're doing, and I think that, you know, there is potential of the world changing. I think that, you know, you just look at the young generation, how much stuff I think the power of money has changed too, because we live in a world now where we're so used to having free everything. I mean, people get their music for free. You can go on YouTube and learn how to tie a tie. You can go to YouTube and learn how to fix anything. We're so used to not having to pay for things that, you know, that's one more thing, you know, that was used to control people, that now you can't, you know, you can't just make people create debt at a young age, you know, go to college, be in debt, come out of college, you know, end up working a job that has nothing to do with what you got a scholarship for, and then unfortunately end up being in this debt for a long time and being a slave to, you know, this machine of going to work every day. And then, you know, because I feel like, you know, one thing that really gets me upset is the fact that we've kind of, and you talk about Protestants and this Protestant history of America, and these Protestant beliefs of this idea that, you know, work, even if it's not a good job, it's not a fulfilling job, it's a good thing. Just work alone is good. And it's like, I think you know, some of those ideas are still with us, where we're convinced that it's a noble life just to go to work every day, pay your bills, and die. And I think that humans are capable of so much more, from the beautiful poetry to art to philosophy to the pyramids to whatever. And to think that that's kind of what we've turned into, where we've just accepted this idea that we should work 5 days a week, give our best years, blood, sweat, and tears to making this business more money, and then we die, and that's it. And I mean, I just think we're capable of so much more. And I think that technology, what the point of technology was to make our lives easier. We created tools, we created hammers and the wheel and all these things so we could have more free time. And so and then something happened where now, instead of technology making things easier, where we should work less, we're working more. And I think it's I wonder if it's not a part of a bigger plan to keep people not thinking and busy with just paying their bills and taking care of their personal lives, and you stay in debt by giving kids in college credit cards before they have any liquid funds and all this stuff, and it's just to keep people dumb. And I just think it's one of those issues where there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to work 4 days a week. There's no reason why we shouldn't have more free time for friends and family and the things that are really important. And that's what I love about talking to older people who've been through that. I think when you're young, you get caught up in this materialism and having the prettiest wife and the biggest car, the biggest house and the nicest car. Then as you get older, you realize like that shit's not important. What's really important is friends and family and all this stuff. And somebody like yourself who's done a lot of traveling, and I just had somebody on, Mariana Van Zeller, who's a journalist, and she has a show on Travel Channel called Breaking Borders, and she travels all over the world. And one thing we talked about is how similar we all are. Like, we all want a safe place to raise a family, good schools, education. We want just to be to have food on the table. We want so even though we focus on all these things that make us different, like skin color and ideologies and religions and what region of the world you're from, when you travel, you learn, and I was born in Portugal. I'm an immigrant myself. You learn that there's more things that we have in common than we have that is different. And is that something you learned, that we use all these things to kind of separate us, but after it's all said and done, we really are very much similar?
No, I think that's true. I think that's one thing you find out, if no other way, experientially, by traveling all over the world and meeting all manner of different people, different countries, different culture, different languages, and so forth, that we're basically all the same. I've got to run.
Yeah, well, yeah, sorry.
well, I have just looked at the clock. I got another commitment here in about 5 minutes.
yeah. Oh, no problem. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I keep up the great work, and keep inspiring people, because I know, listening to your interviews and just looking at your work, it definitely has inspired me, and it's inspiring to see people thinking like this and looking outside the box, and hopefully we can keep inspiring each other, and we do our own little ripple. So thanks a lot. Good luck in Sicily. I know you're going to Sicily to teach, so good luck with that, and have a good time. Have some wine and some cheese, and don't let all this negativity ruin your mood. Hopefully you're still enjoying life a little bit. And
thank you.
Thank you. Hey, thank you very much, and good luck with everything.
Thanks a lot. Will do.
Thank you. Take care.
Believe in the ripple effect.